Hello bookworms! Today I'm going to be sharing my March wrap-up with you. So I read a total of 17 and a half books in March, which is really awesome. I've actually been having a really excellent reading year. I read 17 books in January, 21 books in February, and 17 and a half books now in March. However, I do kind of want to scale back how much I've been reading, which probably sounds like why, but I just do. I think I have like a reading schedule that I go by, and I think optimally for me, I like reading 2 books at a time, and there were points over the past couple of months where I was reading like 4 books at a time, which is just a lot. I think I enjoy it more when I stick to like 2 books at a time. So I read 6,711 pages, but my stats are slightly skewed because I finished reading Oathbringer this month, and I had actually already read about 700 pages of Oathbringer going into the month. However, I think that things will kind of even out because I'm about 700 pages into Rhythm of War and not counting that toward this month. Also, part of the reason that I'm kind of scaling back on reading in April is because I spent a lot of time doing rereads on audiobook over the past couple of months, and I am going to be like pausing listening to audiobooks for now so that I can finally finish campaign 2 of Critical Role, which I've made like really good progress in. I'm on episode 93, so no spoilers, out of 141, so I don't have too much more to go. I just like, that's where I want my focus to be so that I can like have that completed. Everything that I read this month was either sci-fi or fantasy, and I would say that it was definitely my best month of the year enjoyment-wise so far. I think I might make a video of some of my favorite reads from September through February, since I have kind of a gap on my channel there where I wasn't making videos or doing wrap-ups or anything, so I might just talk about like some of the best things that I've read. Let me know if that's something that you'd be interested in seeing. And then I also realized that I have all of the footage from, and mostly edited from, a Legends and Lattes reading vlog that I filmed over the summer that I just never got around to posting. So let me know if that's also something you'd be interested in seeing, because that would actually be on the easier side of things for me to publish here on my channel. I just want to make sure that you're still interested. But moving on to the books that I read in March. So first off, as mentioned, I finally finished reading Oathbringer by Brandon Sanderson, which is the 3rd book in the Stormlight Archive series. This one definitely took me way longer to read than any of the other books, and it's partially because this is Dalinar's book, and Dalinar is kind of my least favorite character. I don't think it's fair to say he's my least favorite, but of the like main 3, I find him the least interesting, though I did really like everything that happened like toward the end of this book. I would love if we could get another Kaladin book. He's definitely my favorite. I don't want to go into spoilers, obviously, because it's the 3rd book in a series. However, I will say that this was definitely my slowest reading experience of any of the Stormlight books so far, but by the end of the book, I loved it so much that I basically abandoned my TBR and just immediately dove into Rhythm of War because I needed to know what was going to happen next. I have been kind of trying to pace myself between books because I didn't want to be waiting for a really long time between installments, especially now that Stormlight 5 has been pushed back to, I think it's November of 2024, but oh well, I just couldn't help myself. After I finished this one, I also had a ton of fun just falling into like an Oathbringer YouTube rabbit hole, and I'm absolutely going to do the same thing for Rhythm of War once I finish reading that one. But this series just continues to be like such a standout, incredible, like masterpiece fantasy epic, and I love it to pieces. If you haven't read Stormlight Archive yet, you have like hours of entertainment and enjoyment ahead of you. Then I read Dawnshard by Brandon Sanderson, and this is probably the best novella that I have ever read in my life. I was pretty apprehensive going into it because I really didn't enjoy Edge Dancer very much, but I am so glad that Dawnshard was the complete opposite reading experience for me. Seafaring adventures are one of my absolute favorite types of fantasy stories, so this exploratory voyage just had me captivated from beginning to end, and I wish it would have been like 500 more pages. Again, I don't want to go into spoilers, but I will say that I am really glad that I read this one before I read Rhythm of War. I think that there were some things that happened in here that are extremely important to the plot, whereas I felt like Edge Dancer didn't really make a huge difference. Like, we got to know Lift a bit better, but it wasn't like groundbreaking, and this I feel like is like groundbreaking and you really need this information. Loved this. And then as mentioned, I'm about 700 pages into Rhythm of War. I have just been savoring my time reading this. I've been reading it really slowly over the course of the month as opposed to like binge reading it, and I think that that's been really good for me. It's giving me a lot more time for all of the like events and character moments and plot points to sink in, and gives me kind of time to reflect and think on everything before jumping into the next chapter or the next section. I definitely anticipate finishing this book in April, especially considering that I'm halfway in now and the plot really has picked up, so I kind of have no doubt that I'm going to be reading the latter half more quickly than I did the beginning half. So far, Words of Radiance is still my favorite Stormlight book, but you never know what could happen. We'll see how I feel upon completing Rhythm of War. Next, I read Nettle Bone by T. Kingfisher. So this is my first T. Kingfisher book, and I really loved it. I think that the prose is really lovely, and I'm so excited to read more of their books. This one is a dark fairy tale about a girl who is the third sister in her family, and she's trying to save her middle sister from a really horrible marriage with this terrible prince that she was forced into by her parents in order to have like an alliance between kingdoms. So we're following Mara, and it's basically her journey in order to find this grave witch and get the tools that she needs to kill the prince. And in order to do so, she has to complete 3 impossible tasks. I really love the found family element in this book and the quirky cast of characters that we're following along the journey. I especially love the chicken that's possessed by a demon. That was just so funny. T. Kingfisher's writing is just exquisite, and it really, really captures the feeling of a dark fairy tale. Upon finishing, I immediately began hoping for a sequel to this one where we will get the like second quest featuring the main character and one of the people that she collects along the way, because it's something that they said that they were going to do, and I would just love to see that story play out too. So very impressed with this and really excited to read more T. Kingfisher. Then I read volumes 2, 3, and 4 of Fullmetal Alchemist. I could not be more obsessed with this series. It's been a really long time since I've been so invested in a manga series, and it's honestly just such a good feeling. Like, I so look forward to picking these up and reading these every single opportunity that I have. Even if I just have like a couple of minutes where Andrew's going downstairs to get more water or something, I'll like sneak in a page or two. It's the perfect blend of comedy, fantasy, and emotional beats. We're following 2 brothers who are on a mission, and it's also a very slice of life story about them traveling and all of the interesting characters that they meet along the way and all of the different areas of the world that they're stopping in order to find information that could help them reach their goal. At this point, after volume 4, I'm especially interested in learning more about the villains of the story, because there are a couple that make an appearance from time to time, but we haven't gotten like too much information about them yet, and I'm just like so curious as to what their deal is. I kind of want to go read more right now. If you haven't read the series, which you probably have because I feel like I'm definitely late to the game on this, I cannot recommend this one enough. Then I read This Vicious Grace by Emily Thied. So Alexa and I have been doing kind of like a fairy loot buddy reading challenge between the two of us, since we were both a little bit behind on some of the monthly books that are released in our subscription boxes. And if this one goes well, I think we're going to do one for Illumicrate as well. Ideally, we want to catch up on all of these before their sequels go on sale, and we end up feeling conflicted about whether to get them or not if we don't know if we enjoyed the first one. So This Vicious Grace was one of the reads for me from that challenge, and I have to say that I was really pleasantly surprised by this book. We're following Alessa, who is the Fenestra, and she's been blessed with a gift from the gods, which basically gives her the ability to enhance the powers of her Fante, who is her partner, and that person's ability will help them save the world. But unfortunately for Alessa, she has had 3 partners so far, and each one has died as a result of her touch. So her people are starting to turn on her, and she needs to find a way to make things right before the upcoming De Verando, which is essentially like an Armageddon situation where these giant winged creatures called Scarabeo come and attack everyone. So since people are turning on her, Alessa doesn't really know who she can trust, so she ventures out on her own, and she finds this guy Dante in kind of like a bad area of town, and she ends up hiring him to be her bodyguard. So he is around when they come up with a new plan where they bring in multiple potential Fantes for Alessa, and I also really liked that her Fante could either be a male or a female. It didn't just have to be like a female-male pairing. I think the world world was really well fleshed out in this one, and I also think that the witty banter was something that I wasn't really anticipating. All of that, along with the depiction of Alessa's loneliness as the chosen one, and even the humor, despite the fact that the world is like potentially ending, all of it just kept me hooked, and I had such a fun reading experience with this one. It was really quick paced, just overall like really enjoyable. I am very much looking forward to the sequel. Then I read Eva Evergreen and the Cursed Witch by Julie Abe. This is the concluding book to the Eva Evergreen duology, and it is a fantasy middle grade series. Though there is a spin-off standalone that's set within the same world called Aliena Girl of Dragons, and I am really excited to read that one. So Eva Evergreen is the daughter of an infamous witch who is known to be one of the most powerful witches within the world. But in the first one, we see Eva kind of struggling because her magic is nowhere near the level that the magic of her mother is. So she has like a very big legacy to live up to, and she just isn't as powerful. She definitely does make advancements, and in this second book, she ends up finding out information as to why there is this element called the culling that is just destroying their world. She finds the source of it, and it leads to a huge issue within the Council of Witches, and her mother also gets kind of put on trial for some dealings that she's had with dark magic. So it's up to Eva to try to band together with her friends and prove her mother's innocence, and then also save the world. Again, in this book, I really love Eva's Firefox companion. It reminds me of the Pokemon Eevee, and this whole world is just so like wholesome and magical. If you like Studio Ghibli, like this is basically like a Studio Ghibli film in novel form. If there are any young readers in your life that are looking for a series, or even if you yourself just tend to like some lighter, more whimsical reads between like deep, dark fantasy books, this is a series that I truly love. It's basically impossible not to fall in love with Eva and her friends while they band together to try to save the world and prove that everyone's place is important despite their perceived level of power. Then I finally read Six Crimson Cranes by Elizabeth Lim. I really enjoyed this one. I actually already have the second book, The Dragon's Promise, on hold at the library, and as soon as that comes in, I'm definitely going to be reading it and finding out how the series ends. In this one, we're following Shiori, who is the princess of Kyoto, and she has a dangerous secret, which is that there is magic running through her veins. There is no magic in Kyoto because they don't want it to attract any demons, but Shiori does have some abilities that she's been hiding. It turns out that her stepmother Raikama also has magic, though hers seems to be of a darker variety, and on the morning of Shiori's betrothal, she gets the attention of her stepmother. So Raikama ends up banishing Shiori and turning her 6 brothers into cranes. Crimson Cranes, actually. If Shiori speaks a single word, her brothers will die, so she is kind of like on her own. She doesn't have any of the luxuries of living in the palace that she's had for her entire life, and she has to set out and try to break her curse and also save her brothers. In the process of all of that, she also becomes privy to a plot to overthrow her father, the Emperor, and there are also dragons, which is really fun. This book is also pretty whimsical. It's a fairy tale in an Asian-inspired world, and I really love Elizabeth Lim's writing. She's very clear and concise. There's a beauty in the simplicity of her style and the way that she is able to convey the story. She also often talks about food, which ends up making me really hungry. And I also really love the descriptions of the seasonal festivals and just the differences in the locations in the different kingdoms within the world. So as I said, I'm really excited to read The Dragon's Promise, and I'm also really excited that this is getting a spin-off series because I will definitely check that out too. Then I can't find my copy, but I also read Violet Made of Thorns by Gina Chen, and this is another one that I read as part of Alexa and I's Fairy Loot Buddy Reading Challenge. I ended up enjoying this one, but not as much as the other ones that I've read so far as part of our little read-along. So in this one, we're following Violet, who is a young prophet that was employed by the king after she saved the life of the prince. She's definitely manipulated by the king, and she ends up lying on his behalf to relay news to the kingdom that he wants to be out there, whether it's to comfort them or manipulate their opinions in different ways. She also has an extremely fraught relationship with Prince Cyrus, who has made it known that once he assumes the throne, he wants to remove Violet from her position and send her off to a different kingdom. So the prince is cursed, and in order to break the curse, he needs to find a wife, and he's very insistent on finding true love. The king wants to reassure the rest of the kingdom, so he influences Violet into lying about the prince meeting his true love at this upcoming ball. But Violet's prophecy ends up awakening a dreaded curse, and basically the whole kingdom is like put at risk of war. So while the book is extremely readable and moves at a very quick pace, and there were elements of it that I liked, I didn't love this one, and it's largely because the main character is really juvenile, and I really hate using that as a criticism when I'm critiquing a YA book, because obviously it's for a younger audience. I'm not the target audience. However, that is honestly why I didn't enjoy it as much. I thought Violet was rather immature, and she made a couple of spiteful decisions throughout the course of the book that just kind of had me rolling my eyes. The romantic relationship was also a hate to love relationship, and I just felt like it was very heavy-handed on the hate, so much so that I didn't really find it believable once the love and attraction part came along. I thought the lore and the world building was entertaining enough, but it also wasn't a main focus of the story. Like, the story was definitely about the romance, and because that didn't grip me, just overall this one wasn't my cup of tea, and I honestly don't think that I will read the next book in the series. Then I don't have physical copies of these, but I reread and finally completed the entire Percy Jackson series by Rick Riordan. So for brevity's sake, I'm going to talk about the series as a whole instead of going into each individual book, because I did read all 5 of them throughout March, and I do feel like it is one continuous story, so it works well to wrap it up all as one. I've previously read books 1 through 4 back in 2015, but I never continued and read book 5, so I wanted to just finally do it. I wasn't a big middle grade reader at that point, and I didn't grow up with Percy Jackson the way that other people have, so I wasn't as fully invested in it when I first tried to read it, and I think I went in with super high expectations because it has such a strong fan base. So I will say that I definitely enjoyed it more this time around. However, it's still not one of my all-time favorite series, but I do think that it's a lot of fun. I had extremely vivid memories of literally every single plot point within The Lightning Thief, and I think that that's also because I've seen The Lightning Thief musical. So of all of it, that was what I remembered most. I didn't really remember the events of books 2 to 4 as much as I did the first book. I also did enjoy Sea of Monsters more this time around than I did the first time, but I do have to say that my favorite of the series is definitely the Battle of the Labyrinth. I think that one is a lot of fun. And then one thing that I think was kind of detrimental to my reading experience is that I listened to all of these on audiobook. I didn't really enjoy The Titan's Curse as much as I remembered enjoying it in the past. I actually ended up knocking off a whole star this time around. And then upon reflection, I realized that it was because the voice of Blackjack just drove me nuts. I remember I finished and I was sitting in the car and I was thinking wow, there were a lot of things that I really liked in this book, and a lot of really fun things that tied back to mythology, but for some reason I just don't feel like I enjoyed it as much. And then all of a sudden on my next when I was reading the next book, Blackjack had an appearance, and I was like, oh my god, that's why I didn't like it. I really just didn't like Blackjack's voice. I'm glad that I finally know how the series ends, and I am excited that there are more books within the same world to keep reading, because despite it being an ending, it does feel like there was so much more opportunity for story and different plot threads that could be explored. And obviously Rick Riordan felt the same way, since there's a million more books. But I'm glad that I squeezed these in before the Percy Jackson adaptation comes to Disney Plus, so I'll kind of have them fresh in my mind. And while I am still not a diehard Percy Jackson fan like other people, I did really enjoy them, and I would like to continue on and read more books set in the world. However, I think I'm going to take a little break from doing so. And then lastly, I also reread the Hunger Games series by Suzanne Collins. I'm just going to hold up the first book because that's a lot easier for me. So I'll do the same thing with the Hunger Games as I did with Percy Jackson and talk about the series as a whole, but I will note I reread the Hunger Games in February, and I reread Catching Fire and Mockingjay in March. Funnily enough, I also hadn't read the Hunger Games since back in 2011, and at that point I wasn't a very big YA reader. I mostly read adult books, and I remember vividly the first time that I was reading The Hunger Games, I was so confused because I thought that The Hunger Games would play out over the course of the 3 books. And when The Hunger Games was wrapping up within the first book, I was what? Like, how is this happening? And like, what are we going to do for the next 2 books? So I think I was just expecting like a much deeper dive when I initially read it, and I found that a little bit disappointing. However, this time around, I knew what to expect, and I definitely loved these like so much more than I did when I first read them. I cried like several times while I was reading each one of these books. I just felt like so much more emotional about the characters and their situation this time around. And I think it's partially because I'm a little bit older and I have a different perspective on the world than I did when I first read them. I also think something that could be a factor is that I've seen the movies numerous times. So I also have like more of a connection to the characters than I did when I first read it. And then just also like when you can see parallels within this world and the current world that we live in, it just is like very hard hitting and like very scary. So I've always loved Finnick, but I think that he might have been my favorite character this time around, outside obviously of Katniss. I really love how resilient and strong-willed Katniss is and how she does not back down from the antagonists in the capital. I also really love that she can see good in people no matter which district they grew up in, and she can also see the flaws even within the rebellion, and she is someone that is like truly fighting for what's best for the average citizen and not for whoever is struggling to have the power within the world, despite what they proclaim their intentions to be. I think this is such a solid trilogy, and I'm so glad that I reread these ones because, as I said, like I really, really loved this reread. It was so enjoyable for me, and I can honestly see myself rereading these like once a year on audio. I think it was just like what I needed. It was so good. So that's everything. Those are all 17 and a half books that I read this month. I am hoping that I will have less books to talk about next month, but we'll see what happens. If I had to pick a favorite, I'm obviously gonna have to go with Stormlight Archive. Next would probably be Fullmetal Alchemist. And then if I was able to include a reread, I would say Hunger Games. There was nothing this month that I really disliked, which is always a plus. Probably my least favorite was Violet Made of Thorns, but even that was like very readable, so it wasn't a bad experience. It just wasn't my cup of tea. But yeah, so that's everything that I read. Let me know some of the things that you read in March. Let me know if there's anything that was like a new favorite for you that I should add to my list. That's all that I have for this video, so I will see you guys soon in a new one. Bye!